Hi all, welcome to Jen's Creation Station. Today's project is a pretty simple recipe mini album. You can't tell from the front cover, but this is a recipe book. This one will be for my sister, and it's going to be personalized, so for privacy purposes I'm not going to show you the finished cover. As you can see, I use my Zutter Bind It All. For the binding I wanted something permanent, and I've got some ribbons started on the top wire. This is the first page inside. I printed this on my printer, and below this video I will give you the complete supply list, including the font, the program I used, the recipe card sizes, everything you'll need to duplicate this recipe book. These are the inside pages. First, I'll show you my page marker. You can take a recipe card out and then put this in between the pages so you know where the card needs to go back. It's a little Karen Foster cookie jar charm. It says cookies on it. And it's just suspended from the Bind It All binding with the ribbon. Then each of the pages has a pocket, and inside the pocket are the recipe cards. Now this is my sister's famous chicken and dumplings recipe, and I've just covered up her name so that, again, for privacy purposes. For the covers for the recipe mini album, you'll need 2 pieces of outside paper, 8.5 inches by 10 inches. Then you'll need 2 pieces of inside paper, 6.25 by 7.75, and then your chipboard for your covers is 6.5 by 8. So let's get started on putting these together. In the measurements in the supply list, I have allowed an extra 1 inch all the way around your outside paper so that when you adhere your chipboard, there'll be plenty of coverage on the inside. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the adhesive on my chipboard for my cover. I'm using dark paper behind my work so that you can see it a little bit easier against my white surface. And now when I lay this down, I'm pretty close to square. And then I like to burnish my paper and chipboard to the adhesive. So I'm just going to do that real quick. And then the next step will be to cut your corners out so that you don't have too much bulk in the corners. I leave just about 1/8 of an inch, a little bit less on the corners, depending on the thickness of your chipboard. There we go. And I'm going to apply adhesive around the edges, and I'll be back in a minute to show you that completed step. So here's our outside of our front cover, and I'm now ready to put the paper on the inside. My measurements allow about 1/8 of an inch all the way around, so it's a tight fit, and the reason I do this is so when I use my Bind It All, this inside paper is caught in the binding holes. So let me do that real quick. And I like to get pretty close to the edge, and so that you know, for some reason my ATG is working itself into a tizzy today for some reason. So I'm having to reapply adhesive. Okay. Now if you're using directional paper, make sure you pay attention to your direction. This doesn't have any direction to it, so I can put it on in any direction. Okay, and there's my completed front cover. Okay, our next step will be to put our holes in our covers with our Bind It All. And I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit so you can see this. I have come in from this edge 3/8 of an inch, and that 3/8 of an inch mark will line up with this hole right here on this side. the outside of the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and punch my first set of holes. I'm going to need to turn my Bind It All a little so that I can see this. I'll punch my first set of holes. Oops. Okay, and then I need to move over to the next to the last hole, just like they tell you in the Zutter Bind It All book. And I'm going to punch more holes. Now for this last punch, what you need to do is you need to come over to the fifth hole. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That goes in your hole guide. And what that will do is line up this last hole down here just perfectly. Okay. I'm going to move this out of the way and flip this cover around so you can see these holes better. And there you go. There's your cover for your recipe album. Now we'll come back and we'll start doing our pages. This is the actual page in the recipe album, and it is 7 3/4 by 6 5/8. And as you can see, I've marked a 5/8 inch mark. We're going to turn that under with our scoreboard and our bone folder, and then that's where our binding will go for our Bind It All. So let me get that set up. Okay, I know my finished page is 6 inches wide, so instead of trying to figure out where to score it over here, I'm just going to score it at 6 inches right here. I've marked it in white so you can see it. And then I'm just going to fold this up here. And then we're going to put adhesive on this. Okay. And now we're ready to put our Bind It All holes in our page. Now I've measured in 1/4 inch from this side, and this 1/4 inch mark will line up with the edge of this first hole right here on your Bind It All. Now I'm going to have to turn my Bind It All a little bit to make these holes, to get them accurate. So bear with me and I'll show you what it looks like when it's all done. Then you move it over to the next to the last hole. Punch again. Now if you count 5 from the end, 2, 3, 4, 5, and put that on your hole guide, you will have a perfect placement at the other end of your cardstock. Okay, and there's our holes for our page. Okay, our next step is to prepare our pockets. Now I've cut my decorative cardstock 6 inches wide and 4.5 inches high. That gives me a 3/8 inch turn under here and here, and a 1/2 inch at the bottom. You can see my score line. This is double-sided decorative paper. Most of mine wasn't. I just found this in my stash and really liked it. And before I go any further, you'll notice that my pages are olive green. My sister's were brown. This is one of the colors in my kitchen, so I chose to make my recipe book in these colors. So let me get these corners cut out, just like we did in the Checking It Twice mini album. I want you to just angle your cuts out of your corners so that when you fold your pages, your edges up, they fold properly. And I also just take a little nip at the tops. There we go. I don't know if you can see that very well, but just gives it a more finished look. Okay, I've got my folds scored, and I wanted to show you something. Sometimes when you buy decorative paper or cardstock, when you do folds, the finish fractures, so I have a tendency to ink my edges, which is what I've done here, and I have an aversion to white, so I even ink the top edge too. It just gives it a more finished look. I'm going to adhere this now to my page. If you watched my Checking It Twice mini album, I do this on all my pockets. This is a very similar pocket. I do my two edges first, my side edges first, holds that in place, and now I put adhesive on the bottom. Okay. And you have about 1/4 of an inch all the way around with my measurements. This is what your pocket will look like. And then you'll want to put a pocket just like that on the back. And now we're ready to move on to the recipe cards. The next step is to cut your recipe cards. Now all of my recipe cards are Stampin' Up's very vanilla cardstock. And I cut mine at 4 3/4 by 7 1/4 inches. And after I printed my recipes, then I used a corner rounder, this green one from EK Success, and I used chocolate chip ink from Stampin' Up and a sponge and sponged the edges on both sides, and my recipe cards were complete and ready to go in the pockets on my pages. I just want to review the settings I used to print my recipes onto my recipe cards. I pre-cut my recipe cards, and I have a Lexmark all-in-one printer, and this worked for my printer. My printer is a center feed. In other words, my paper is centered when it feeds through to print. This might not work for yours. You'll need to experiment. I did a lot of experimenting before I came up with this formula for my cards. So all these settings will be down below the video, so you don't have to write them down right now. I just wanted to review them. I set my paper at portrait, and I manually set my paper size to 5 inches wide and 7 1/4 inches high. And then my margins, the top margin is 0.2 inches, and then the bottom, left, and right margins are 0.5 inches. The font I used was Bookman Old Style, and for the title I used bold and italic at 14 point, and then for the body of the recipe I used 12 point. I only ran into one incident where I had to shrink the body of the recipe to 10 point because it didn't fit on two sides of the recipe card. So I hope that helps you. I wanted to show you the closure on my sister's recipe album. I didn't want anything that stuck up off the book too far so it would catch on other recipe books. And these little things are rivets. They're made by Zutter, and there's 50 sets in this little bottle. And this is what you get in a set. I don't know if you can see that, but the knob on the left is on the front, and then this is the little piece that comes through the hole. I used the small hole on my Crop-A-Dile, and it was a perfect fit for the rivet. However, once I got them in, I realized that they slide in and out of the hole. Now this one is just pushed together and then pounded slightly, and I had to cover the back of the rivet to keep it in place. I also glued it in place, and it seems to be doing pretty good. This one has a space for the rubber band to fit around. The back, I wanted it secure, so I pounded and pounded until this was tight. This is just a hair rubber band, and then I just covered the insides with pretty paper to cover the brass so it wouldn't mess up the recipe cards. I hope you enjoy making one of these recipe mini albums. Thanks for stopping by Jen's Creation Station today.